Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Ever had someone talk down to you while you're standing on your own property? The HOA president marched up while I was mowing and told me to tell the owner the rental experiment was over. She thought I was the handyman. I nodded, smiled, and took notes. Because every insult, every threat, every fake violation was about to turn into evidence, and the annual HOA meeting was coming. What do you think I walked in holding? Let me start from the beginning. About 5 years ago, I bought a beautiful house in a gated community about 45 minutes from where I live and work. It was a great investment property in an area that was appreciating nicely. The house sits on a quiet street with mature trees and well-maintained homes. I had no intention of living there myself since my job keeps me tied to the city, but it seemed like the perfect rental property. I found the ideal tenant almost immediately. She's a freelance graphic designer who works from home and needed a quiet place with good internet and space for her home office. She's been absolutely perfect from day one, always pays rent early, keeps the place spotless, and maintains the yard better than most homeowners do. She's quiet, professional, and exactly the kind of tenant any reasonable landlord would want. The HOA seemed pretty standard when I bought the place. Monthly fees, basic rules about keeping properties maintained, nothing too crazy. I paid my dues on time, followed the rules, and figured I'd never have any problems. The management company handled most of the day-to-day stuff, and I rarely had to think about HOA issues. That all changed about 6 months ago when they elected a new board president. I'll call her the board president since I want to keep this anonymous, but let me tell you, this woman had some serious control issues. She seemed to think she was running a military base instead of a homeowners association. Within weeks of taking over, she started sending out new rules and regulations about everything from what color mailboxes people could have to how many cars could be parked in driveways. The board president had this sidekick too, a guy who carried around a clipboard and walked the neighborhood looking for violations. This guy would measure grass height, count how many trash cans people had out, and generally make everyone's life miserable. They made quite the pair. About 3 months into the new board president's reign of terror, I started hearing from other homeowners that she had it out for renters. Apparently, she felt that rental properties brought down property values and didn't fit the vision she had for the community. She started pushing for new rules that would make it difficult for property owners to rent their homes. I wasn't too worried at first. I owned the property outright, had all the proper paperwork, and my tenant was exemplary. Plus, there was nothing in the original HOA bylaws that prohibited rentals. I figured any reasonable person would see that my tenant was an asset to the neighborhood, not a problem. I was wrong. One Thursday afternoon, I got a frantic call from my tenant. She was clearly upset and talking fast, which was unusual since she's normally very calm and collected. She told me that someone had taped a notice to her front door that morning while she was out getting coffee. The notice claimed that her lease was unauthorized and that she had to vacate the property within 14 days, or face daily fines of $250. I told her to send me photos of the notice immediately. When I saw it, I was furious. It was printed on official-looking HOA documentation and was signed by the board president. But here's the thing that really got me angry. They had taped this notice to the front door where all the neighbors could see it. This was clearly designed to embarrass and intimidate my tenant. The notice claimed that the board had recently passed a rule about single-family occupancy and that rental arrangements needed to be pre-approved by the board. It stated that since no approval had been sought, the lease was invalid and the tenant needed to leave immediately. I read through this thing multiple times, getting angrier each time. First of all, they had no legal authority to declare a lease invalid. Second, they were trying to apply a new rule retroactively to existing arrangements. Third, the notice was addressed to current occupant. They didn't even know my tenant's name, which told me they had done zero research before sending this threatening document. I told my tenant not to pack a single box and to document everything. I told her to buy a nice binder and put every piece of correspondence from the HOA in it. I also told her to buy herself a bottle of wine because we were going to be collecting some serious documentation over the next few weeks. My first step was to call the HOA management company to straighten this out. I figured there had been some miscommunication and that once I explained that I was the actual property owner, they would back off immediately. The woman who answered the phone at the management company was polite at first, but as soon as I mentioned my address and explained the situation, her tone changed completely. She told me that the account was flagged for legal review and that she couldn't discuss any details with me. When I explained that I was the property owner and had been paying HOA dues for 5 years, she said she would need to verify my identity and call me back. She never called back. I tried calling several more times over the next few days, but I kept getting the runaround. They would either put me on hold indefinitely or transfer me to someone who claimed they couldn't help me. It was clear that the board president had given them instructions not to talk to me. This is when things got really interesting. I decided to drive over to the property to check on my tenant and see what was going on in the neighborhood. I brought my lawnmower because the grass was getting a little long and I wanted to help my tenant out. I was in the front yard mowing when I saw the board president walking down the street with her clipboard-carrying sidekick. She marched right up to me and started talking before I could even turn off the mower. She asked me if I was the handyman and told me that I needed to tell my boss that his little rental experiment was over. She said the neighborhood was for families, not transient renters, and that the board wasn't going to tolerate this anymore. She was talking loud enough that several neighbors came out to see what was going on. I just nodded and told her I would make sure the owner got the message. She seemed satisfied with that and walked away, looking very pleased with herself. This gave me an idea. If the board president thought I was just a handyman, I could use that to my advantage. I started coming by the property more often, always doing yard work or small maintenance tasks. Every time I ran into board members, they would make comments about the situation and give me messages to pass along to the real owner. Meanwhile, the harassment was escalating. The next week, my tenant received another notice claiming that the grass was a 1/4 inch too long and that she was being fined $50. The week after that, they claimed her car, a clean, well-maintained sedan that was only 5 years old, was an eyesore and assessed another fine. They were clearly just making stuff up at this point. The grass was perfectly normal length, and her car was nicer than most vehicles in the neighborhood. But every few days, there would be another notice taped to the door with some ridiculous violation and an accompanying fine. My tenant was getting genuinely scared. She asked me if she should start looking for another place to live because she couldn't afford to keep paying these arbitrary fines. I told her to sit tight and keep documenting everything. I assured her that I had a plan and that everything was going to work out. The harassment continued for several more weeks. They fined her for having her trash cans out too long, even though she had put them out the night before pickup just like everyone else. They claimed her outdoor doormat was the wrong color. They even sent a notice saying that her internet service provider's van had been parked in her driveway for too long when the technician came to fix her connection. Each notice was more ridiculous than the last, but they kept increasing the fines. By this point, they were claiming she owed over $2,000 in various penalties. The final straw came when they sent a final eviction warning addressed to current occupant. This notice claimed that since she had failed to vacate the property as instructed, they were going to change the locks within 48 hours. They said this was authorized under their emergency powers to protect the community. This was completely illegal, of course. Only a court can authorize an eviction, and only after proper legal proceedings. But it was clear that the board president thought she could just intimidate my tenant into leaving without following any actual laws. I realized that these people were digging their own grave, and I decided to let them keep digging. Instead of stopping them, I started collecting even more documentation. I had my tenant photograph every notice, every fine, every piece of correspondence. I also had her document the dates and times when board members came by the property to harass her. I did send one formal letter to the HOA requesting dispute resolution, as required by their own bylaws. I sent it via certified mail and purposely made my signature a little hard to read. I figured if they were going to ignore proper procedures, I might as well make it easy for them to make that mistake. Sure enough, they never responded to my letter. They probably assumed they had scared off another property owner who didn't want to deal with their threats. During this whole time, I was doing my own research into the HOA bylaws and state laws regarding tenant rights. I discovered some very interesting things. First, the board president and her cronies were clearly violating multiple state laws regarding tenant harassment and privacy. Second, they were acting outside their authority by trying to circumvent the management company and handle legal matters themselves. But here's the most interesting part. I found a section in the HOA bylaws that stated, if a board member harasses a tenant without proper cause, Both the HOA and the individual board members could be held personally liable for the tenant's legal fees and damages for violation of quiet enjoyment rights. The more I read, the more I realize that these people had walked into a legal minefield. They had violated tenant rights, ignored their own procedures, and exposed themselves to personal liability. And they had documented all of it in writing. I started making some phone calls to attorney friends, and one of them referred me to a specialist in real estate and HOA law. This attorney was very interested in the case, especially when I showed her the binder full of illegal notices and threats. She explained that what the HOA was doing constituted harassment, illegal eviction attempts, and violation of tenant privacy rights. She also confirmed that because the board members had acted outside their official capacity and ignored proper procedures, their insurance probably wouldn't cover them if they got sued. We started preparing our case, but I decided to wait for the right moment to reveal what was really going on. The annual HOA meeting was coming up in a few weeks, and I figured that would be the perfect opportunity to make my move. I registered to attend the meeting as a homeowner, but I didn't mention anything about the rental situation. As far as the board knew, I was just another property owner who wanted to attend the annual meeting. The night before the meeting, I had dinner with my tenant and the attorney. We went over our plan one more time and made sure we had all our documentation organized. My tenant was nervous but excited to finally get some justice for all the harassment she had endured. The meeting was held in the community center on a Tuesday evening. About 30 homeowners showed up, which was apparently a pretty good turnout. The board president and her sidekick were sitting at the front table, looking very pleased with themselves. The meeting started with the usual boring reports about finances and maintenance issues. Then the board president stood up to give her report on community improvements she had made during her tenure. She talked about how she had been working to elevate the standards of the neighborhood and protect property values by addressing problem properties. She specifically mentioned that she had been dealing with unauthorized rental situations that were threatening the character of the community. She went on to explain how she had successfully removed undesirable tenants from several properties and how the neighborhood was now returning to its intended purpose as a family-oriented community. She was clearly very proud of what she thought she had accomplished. This was my moment. I stood up and asked if I could address the board about a rental situation in the neighborhood. The board president got a big smile on her face and told me that she was always happy to help property owners deal with problem tenants. She assumed I was another homeowner who wanted her help getting rid of a renter. I walked to the front of the room carrying the binder full of documentation. I placed it on the table and opened it to show all the notices, fines, and threats that had been sent to my tenant. I then announced to the room that I was the owner of the property that had been receiving all these notices. I explained that I had owned the home outright for 5 years and that my tenant was completely legal and had been exemplary from day one. The board president's face went completely white. She started stammering something about how they hadn't known I was the owner and that there must have been some misunderstanding. I kept going. I explained how the board had been harassing my tenant for months, violating her privacy rights, attempting illegal eviction, and imposing arbitrary fines with no legal basis. I pointed out that they had ignored their own dispute resolution procedures and had acted outside their authority. Then my attorney friend stood up and introduced herself to the room. She handed out copies of an intent to sue notice to each board member individually. She explained that because they had acted outside their official capacity and violated multiple state laws, they were personally liable for damages. She also explained that their actions constituted harassment and illegal eviction attempts, which could result in significant financial penalties under state law. She mentioned that we would be seeking compensation for my tenant's emotional distress, violation of quiet enjoyment rights, and legal fees. The room was completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Several homeowners were shaking their heads in disbelief at what the board had done. The board president tried to argue that they were just enforcing community standards, but my attorney quickly shut that down. She pointed out that the board had no authority to declare leases invalid or to attempt evictions without court orders. She also noted that they had violated their own bylaws by bypassing proper procedures. The clipboard-carrying sidekick tried to claim that they had been acting on advice from the management company, but I had documentation showing that the management company had specifically advised them not to take these actions. One of the other homeowners asked how much this lawsuit was going to cost the HOA, and my attorney explained that because the board members had acted outside their official capacity, their insurance wouldn't cover them. They would be personally responsible for any damages and legal fees. Several board members immediately announced their resignations. The board president tried to stay in control, but it was clear that she had lost all support from the other homeowners. The meeting ended with the remaining homeowners voting to dissolve the current board and schedule new elections. They also voted to settle with my tenant immediately rather than face a lengthy lawsuit. Over the next few weeks, the details of the settlement were worked out. My tenant received a substantial payment for the harassment she had endured, which I told her to keep as compensation for all the stress the board had put her through. The board president ended up having to sell her house to pay for her portion of the settlement and legal fees. The clipboard carrier also moved out of the neighborhood rather than deal with the financial consequences of his actions. The other homeowners asked me to run for board president in the new elections, and I agreed. My first official act was to abolish all the petty rules that the previous board had implemented. No more measuring grass length, no more restrictions on car types, and definitely no more harassment of tenants. I also implemented new policies requiring the board to follow proper legal procedures before taking any enforcement actions. Any major decisions now require input from the management company and legal review when appropriate. My tenant is still living in the house and is happier than ever. The neighborhood has settled down and most of the homeowners are relieved to have reasonable leadership again. Property values have actually increased since we got rid of the harassment and arbitrary enforcement. The funniest part of this whole situation is that the former board president's house is now being rented out by its new owners. I made sure to personally approve their rental application as part of my duties as the new board president. Looking back, I think the most satisfying part wasn't even the financial settlement or seeing the board president lose her house. It was watching her face when she realized that all her harassment and threats had been directed at someone who had every legal right to be there, and that her actions had exposed her to personal liability. The whole situation could have been avoided if she had simply followed proper procedures and treated people with basic respect. Instead, her desire for control and her prejudice against renters led her to make increasingly bad decisions until she painted herself into a corner. I learned a lot from this experience about the importance of documentation and knowing your rights. I also learned that sometimes the best response to bullies is to let them dig their own grave while you carefully document everything they do wrong. The neighborhood is much more peaceful now, and I think most residents prefer having a board that focuses on actual community needs rather than petty power trips. My tenant has become friends with several neighbors and is thinking about buying her own house in the area when her lease is up. As for the HOA, we're running much more smoothly under the new board. We focus on actual maintenance issues and community improvements rather than trying to control every aspect of people's lives. Surprisingly, this approach has been much more effective at maintaining property values and community standards. The management company is also much more cooperative now that they don't have to deal with board members who think they're above the law. They've been helpful in implementing proper procedures and making sure we comply with all relevant regulations. I still drive over to check on the property regularly, but now it's purely for maintenance and to visit with my tenant rather than to gather evidence of harassment. It's nice to be able to enjoy the property in the neighborhood without having to worry about what the HOA might do next. The whole experience reinforced my belief that most problems can be solved through communication and following proper procedures. When people start trying to circumvent the rules and intimidate others, they usually end up creating much bigger problems for themselves. I also learned the value of having good legal counsel when dealing with property issues. My attorney was instrumental in understanding the legal implications of what the board was doing and developing an effective response strategy. For anyone dealing with similar HOA problems, my advice would be to document everything, know your rights, and don't let bullies intimidate you into giving up what you're legally entitled to. Sometimes standing up to unreasonable people is the only way to stop their behavior and protect yourself and others from future harassment. The story isn't completely over yet because we're still implementing some of the changes needed to prevent similar problems in the future. We're working on updating the HOA bylaws to include clearer procedures for handling disputes and stronger protections against harassment. We're also looking at ways to improve communication between the board and homeowners so that concerns can be addressed before they escalate into major conflicts. The goal is to create a community where people feel heard and respected, regardless of whether they live in their homes or rent them out. The former board president occasionally drives through the neighborhood, probably checking to see if we've let the place fall apart without her iron-fisted leadership. I'm sure she's disappointed to see that the community is actually thriving under more reasonable management. My tenant mentioned that she saw her a few weeks ago, and that the former board president pretended not to recognize her. Given everything that happened, that's probably the wise choice. I doubt she wants to be reminded of how her power trip ended up costing her so much money and forcing her to move away from the neighborhood she claimed to care so much about. The clipboard-carrying sidekick has apparently found a new neighborhood to patrol, though I heard from some mutual contacts that his new HOA is much less tolerant of his overzealous enforcement style. It seems like word has gotten around about what happened here, and other boards are being more careful about how they handle enforcement issues. One of the most gratifying parts of this whole experience has been hearing from other homeowners about problems they had with the previous board that they never reported. Apparently, the harassment wasn't limited to rental properties. The former board president had been targeting anyone who didn't fit her vision of the perfect neighborhood. Several elderly residents mentioned that they had received threatening letters about minor maintenance issues that were completely normal wear and tear. A few families with teenagers had been harassed about noise complaints that were never verified. It seems like the rental situation was just the tip of the iceberg. Now that we have a more reasonable board in place, these homeowners feel comfortable bringing up legitimate maintenance and community issues. We've been able to address several real problems that were being ignored while the previous board focused on their petty harassment campaign. The management company has also been much more helpful now that they don't have to deal with board members who think they can ignore legal requirements. They've provided valuable guidance on updating our procedures and making sure we comply with all state and local regulations. We've implemented regular training for board members on their legal responsibilities and limitations. This has helped prevent the kind of overreach that led to the previous problems and has made our decision-making process much more professional. The financial situation of the HOA has also improved significantly. We're no longer spending money on legal fees related to harassment complaints, and our insurance premiums have gone down because we're seen as a lower-risk community. We've been able to redirect that money toward actual community improvements like upgraded landscaping, better lighting, and maintenance projects that were neglected while the previous board was focused on their enforcement campaign. Property values in the neighborhood have continued to appreciate, which contradicts the former board president's claims that rental properties were harmful to the community. In fact, several real estate agents have mentioned that our reasonable HOA policies are actually a selling point for potential buyers. My tenant has become something of a neighborhood success story. She started a small business providing graphic design services to other residents and has become actively involved in community activities. She's exactly the kind of neighbor anyone would want, which makes the previous harassment even more ridiculous in hindsight. The whole experience has taught me a lot about the importance of good governance and treating people with respect. It's also reinforced my belief that most conflicts can be resolved through proper communication and following established procedures. For other property owners dealing with problematic HOAs, I would recommend getting familiar with your local laws and the HOA's own bylaws. Often these organizations are counting on people not knowing their rights or being too intimidated to fight back. Documentation is crucial if you end up in a legal dispute. Keep copies of everything and make detailed notes about any interactions with board members or management company representatives. This information can be invaluable if you need to prove harassment or improper conduct. It's also important to understand the difference between the HOA's legitimate authority and overreach. Boards do have the right to enforce reasonable community standards, but they can't ignore state laws or their own procedures when doing so. Finally, don't be afraid to seek legal counsel if you believe your rights are being violated. Many attorneys offer free consultations for these types of cases, and the cost of fighting back is often less than the cost of giving in to unreasonable demands. The HOA tried to evict my tenant with threatening letters and illegal procedures. Instead, they ended up evicting themselves from their positions and from the neighborhood. Sometimes justice does prevail, especially when bullies overreach and ignore the law while documenting their own misconduct. The neighborhood is now a much more pleasant place to live and invest in. We have reasonable rules that are fairly enforced, and residents feel comfortable approaching the board with legitimate concerns. It's amazing what a difference good leadership can make in a community. As for my tenant, she's still happily living in the house and has expressed interest in eventually buying property in the neighborhood. After everything she went through, she deserves to find a place where she feels welcome and respected. The former board president learned an expensive lesson about the consequences of harassment and overreach. Her desire to control the neighborhood ended up costing her far more than she ever could have imagined. Meanwhile, the community she claimed to be protecting is doing better than ever under more reasonable leadership. The story continues to evolve as we work on long-term improvements to our governance and community standards. We're focused on creating policies that actually benefit residents rather than giving board members power trips. It's a much better approach, and the results speak for themselves. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Backstory. For the past few years, I've been a nurse. I spent the first part of my career in the emergency at a small hospital in Canada. We can do basic admissions, surgeries, and critical care, but we'll transfer the really sick ones to larger metropolitan hospitals with more services like cardiology or trauma surgery. Because the population we served was so small, we ran with the bare minimum of nurses to keep the department afloat, usually resulting in an extra patient per nurse compared to other hospitals, but with a lower acuity level, on average, so it balances out. As a result, we would often be overwhelmed during the second half of the day shift and the start of the night shift when it was most busy, but due to low volumes of patients later on in the night, we often were well enough staffed to easily handle the workload. That is, we could safely run even fewer nurses, but management hadn't gone there. Secondly, because we ran with such a small number of nurses, we never had break cover, so if your nursing partner was on break, you would watch double the number of patients. Not a big deal at night, but during day. This could result in missing our last 30-minute unpaid break on the day shift due to high workload. A last piece of info is that we use teams of one emergency nurse, a nurse extra training to have a higher scope of care, and one med-surg nurse, seasoned nurse awaiting a spot in the additional training program. Because of this, the nurses would give and take report together, so instead of each nurse handing over 4 to 5 patients simultaneously, they hand over 8 to 10 together, so report takes twice as long. Our union had negotiated our contract to counteract any wage theft, allowing us to sign for our unpaid 30-minute break at overtime rates of 1.5 times pay. We missed this break maybe every other day shift, so once during a 2-day, 2-night rotation, as well as sign for an additional 15 minutes of straight time pay in case handover went over our 12-hour shift, which was always. Of course, management didn't like having to pay this out, but it wasn't an issue because we, the nurses, were also stealing time. I know it doesn't sound great, but on those quiet night shifts, we would often take an extra 30 to 45 minutes to sleep, which balanced out those 1.5 to 2 hours of lost pay from the day shifts and handover. Because the workload was so low at the time, and because only one emergency physician was on at night, it could be easily managed by one nurse, so patient throughput was the same as if 2 nurses were working. We often sit around waiting for orders from the doctor. Furthermore, nurses always left their number with their partner so we could be called back early if it kicked off and needed all hands on deck. Obviously, if we had many very sick patients, we stuck to the entitled amount only or missed it entirely. Everyone was happy for the first few years I worked there. The management, and therefore government, saved the extra pay without affecting patient throughput, and the extra sleep time on break really helped to maintain nurse well-being as well as making the switch from nights back to days much easier. Then one of our less pleasant charge nurses got angry at this. The charge nurse role is like the boss of the unit. On most units with admitted patients, this was a 0800 to 1600 Monday to Friday type gig that was covered by regular bedside nurses when the charge nurse wasn't there. In emergency, however, we had specific nurses working rotating shifts in this role with a small pay bump and any gaps in the schedule filled by very senior emergency nurses, as it was a much more unique beast to manage. I say this only to give benefit of the doubt that this nurse was probably stressed out like crazy every shift, so I'm sitting at work in the morning waiting for the inevitable onslaught when the email pops up stating night shifts are to be limited to union-mandated break time only. I'm a bit pissed off at it, but ultimately they're right. We're only entitled to a 60 minutes of unpaid break time and 45 minutes of paid break time. And to be fair, some nurses were definitely abusing the previous system. One nurse who covered charge would advocate for over 3.5 hours of break time on a night shift regardless of how sick the patients were, and that would affect patient safety as it bled into the first part of the night. When we actually still busy, most of the nurses refused to follow them on this. However, people like this were rare. Most nurses don't come to the emergency to be lazy. This email soon gets posted in our group chat so everyone's aware. A lot of the younger staff, millennials at this time, were aware of our rights and immediately started signing for all missed breaks as well as additional handover time as well as helping the older staff understand the contract. I missed my last break that shift and stayed until quarter past shift change for report, so I got an extra $50 gross on my paycheck for that. The charge nurse on that day was surprised when I presented to OT form for their signature, but I just told them I was following the rules to prevent any pay discrepancies. My next shift, at night, there was a sign and sheet on the desk for us to write our in and out time for breaks, with a space for our phone number too, so they could call us back, even though we weren't paid the extra $4 an hour to be on call, and calling us back should have been paid at overtime rates per the contract. I refused to leave my number, stating that unless there was a code blue, medical emergency usually means there's no pulse, there was no way I was coming back early. Code blues were called overhead, so they didn't need my number. For the next 2 weeks, I stuck to the contract. Every missed break and extended handover was documented. And of course, I signed in and out of my breaks on the dot. I spent so much time on night shifts staring at my phone waiting for the doctor to give me something to do as I'd caught up on everything else. It might not seem like a lot, but that extra hour of handover pay plus occasional missed breaks per shift set would have added up to roughly $2,000 extra per year per full-time nurse, which is a decent amount of change to a publicly funded healthcare system. Eventually, the manager noticed and came around clarifying that while they would sign for any extra wages if we wished, we could also choose to sleep extra on nights if we wished, providing we left our number. I asked for them to email that to me, and while I could have sent that straight to the union rep, I didn't bother as I had already gotten the sleep time back. I left that job later on and have been very happy at a much bigger hospital for 2 years now. Now I have a nurse come cover mine and my partner's break. There's no teams, and they encourage us to take longer breaks when possible to prevent staff burnout, which was really prevalent at this one. I now document my missed breaks and extra sleep time to make sure it matches up. They're also willing to sign for missed breaks on top of that to help staff retention, but my conscience doesn't let me go that far. I'm just happy to sleep. The next one is an entitled people story. My neighbor is an idiot, and we've been having issues with her from the start. 6-hour relentless dog barking 4 days a week for years, yelling at me for stealing water flowing downhill, dead rabbit on the doorstep, the usual property line arguments, emptying her toxic hot tub onto our property, lying by the hedges to spy on us, parties, noise, etc. ad nauseum. Just run-of-the-mill bad neighbor stuff. Eventually we built a giant fence and it had kept the ball cap to a minimum. Both yards have plenty of mature trees. We have 3 maples over 150 years old and a nearly 100-year-old birch, a 12-foot cedar hedge. Add that to the giant fence and daylight is at a minimum in our backyard in the summer. Idiot neighbor had 2 century-old trees and a very mature mulberry tree that hung over the fence in the only area that enjoys direct sunlight. Now, this part is entirely our fault. One spring, we built a patio there with light gray stone. The mulberry tree has dark purple fruit, and hers is extremely prolific. The week construction was finished was the week the berries ripened and began to drop in the slightest breeze. Sitting out there for any length of time, and you would be pelted with berries, leaving purple stains like you were shot with a paintball, and sweeping a path was the only way to not step on them. If this only lasted for a few weeks, it would be tolerable, but mulberries are in season all summer. The number of birds that feasted on the fruit and promptly deposited bright purple bird crap on everything we owned outside was unbelievable. Purple bird crap drip-dried everywhere on the patio and beyond. We started putting tarps over the entire patio to collect the bird dung-coated berries and emptying them into a bucket every time we wanted to use the patio. Remembering our neighbor's penchant for eavesdropping, I began to talk about mulberry wine. About how good my mulberry wine was, and how this year's bumper crop of mulberries was going to make so much wine, and how we were going to go on a vacation with all the money I was making from selling my mulberry moonshine. Visitors joined in the act, claiming they could not wait for their allotment of my fabulous mulberry wine, and offering bribes to be moved up the list. I do not make mulberry wine, never have, and would not start with mulberry bird poop wine. One rainy early summer night, I heard and felt a tremendous crash. I ran into the backyard. The largest limb from the mulberry tree was lying in my backyard. A chainsaw was sputtering on the other side of my giant fence. The mulberry tree was coming down, at night, in a rainstorm. More evidence of her idiocy. There was a bit of yelling back and forth through the fence, me about her being a dangerous moron, and her to me about having a nice vacation without having mulberry wine to sell. She continued to cut down the whole tree instead of just the limbs hanging over our property. I laughed myself into the house, not quite believing my ruse worked so well and revenge was finally mine, but that poor tree died needlessly. Barely a month later, a vicious storm blew through our area, splitting one of her mature trees in half and damaging the other so badly it had to be removed. Now, the idiot has no trees, but all mine are still standing. The next story is titled, My Neighbor Constructed an Unlawful House on a Small Plot Adjacent to My Property, Causing Damage to My Driveway. Growing up in a small town, I had always been taught to be kind and respectful to my neighbors, and for the most part, I had always gotten along well with the people who lived near me. But when a new neighbor moved in next door, things took a turn for the worse. The property next to mine had always been a small, vacant lot, too small to build a house on, but big enough for a garden or a small shed. I had always enjoyed the open space and the view of the trees beyond the lot. However, my new neighbor had other plans. He was a single guy in his 30s, and he seemed to be the kind of person who always wanted to stand out. When he first moved in, he came over to introduce himself, and I welcomed him to the neighborhood. However, I soon realized that he was not going to be an easy neighbor to deal with. One day, I looked out my window and saw that he had started to build a tree house on the small lot next to my property. At first, I thought it was kind of cute, and I didn't mind it too much. However, as he continued to work on it, I realized he was building it higher and higher until it was towering over my yard, blocking my view of the trees. I asked him if he had a permit to build the treehouse, and he just laughed and said that he didn't need one. He told me that he was building it for his niece, who he said loved to climb trees. However, I soon realized that he had built it more for himself than for his niece. He would often climb up there with a book or a beer, and he would sit there for hours, enjoying the view that he had stolen from me. I tried to reason with him, but he wasn't interested in listening. He told me that it was his property, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. I felt like I was hitting a brick wall. Days turned into weeks, and my neighbor's treehouse grew taller and taller until it was like a tower in the sky, blocking my view of the sunsets and the trees that I loved so much. I grew angrier with each passing day, but I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless and frustrated, and I couldn't even enjoy my own backyard anymore. One day, when I was coming home from work, I saw that he had installed a zip line from his treehouse to the edge of my property. I couldn't believe it. He was basically turning my yard into his personal playground. I was furious. I decided to take action. I contacted the town's zoning office and reported him for building an illegal structure without a permit. I also told them about the zip line and how it was invading my property. They sent an inspector over to investigate, and sure enough, the treehouse was illegal. My neighbor was given a fine, and he was ordered to take it down. However, he was not going to go down without a fight. He started arguing with the inspector and saying that it wasn't fair. He also told me that he was going to sue me for ruining his treehouse. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, but I knew that I had to stand my ground. I hired a lawyer and prepared for a legal battle. In the end, the case went to court and my neighbor lost. He was forced to take down the treehouse and pay a hefty fine. He was also ordered to stay away from my property and not to harass me anymore. I thought that the nightmare was over, but little did I know that there was more trouble to come. A few months after the legal battle, my neighbor started acting strange. He would often glare at me whenever I walked by his property, and I would hear him muttering under his breath. I tried my best to ignore him and go about my business, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was up to something. One day, I came home from work and saw that my yard was in disarray. My lawn had been torn up, and my flower beds had been trampled. It looked like someone had driven a heavy vehicle through my yard and destroyed everything in its path. I immediately suspected my neighbor, but I had no proof. I contacted the police and they investigated the incident, but they couldn't find any evidence to link my neighbor to the destruction of my property. I was devastated. I had spent years cultivating my yard and creating a beautiful outdoor space, and now it was all destroyed. I didn't know what to do. But then something miraculous happened. My community rallied around me and people from all over town came to help me fix up my yard. They brought plants and flowers and helped me replant everything. It was a beautiful sight to see, and it made me realize how much I loved my town and the people in it. It's been a few years since the incident with my former neighbor, and I thought that everything was behind me. However, I recently received a letter in the mail that changed everything. The letter was from a law firm, and it stated that my former neighbor had filed a lawsuit against me for intentional infliction of emotional distress. According to the lawsuit, my neighbor claimed that my actions had caused him severe emotional distress, and he was seeking damages for the harm that I had caused him. I was shocked and confused. I had no idea what he was talking about. As far as I knew, I had done nothing to intentionally harm him. I contacted my lawyer and we started to investigate the matter. It turned out that my former neighbor had moved to another state, but he had kept tabs on me through social media. He had seen that I had moved to a new town and had started a new business, and he believed that I had done so with the intention of hurting him. It was ridiculous, but he had apparently become fixated on the idea that I was out to get him. He had spent years building up this delusion in his mind, and he was now seeking revenge for a perceived slight. The lawsuit was a complete surprise, and I was not sure how to proceed. However, with the help of my lawyer, we were able to build a strong defense against his claims. We provided evidence that showed that I had not intentionally harmed him and that he was the one who had caused the trouble in the first place. The case went to court, and it was a long and arduous process. My former neighbor was determined to get his revenge, and he fought tooth and nail to win the case. However, in the end, justice prevailed and the judge ruled in my favor. My former neighbor was ordered to pay for all the legal fees and damages that he had caused. It was a victory for me, but it was also a reminder of how fragile our sense of security can be. I never could have imagined that a simple dispute with a neighbor would turn into such a long and drawn-out legal battle. However, I also learned that when faced with adversity, it's important to stay strong and to fight for what's right. The experience made me more aware of my rights and more determined to protest them. As for my former neighbor, I hope that he finds peace and can move on from his obsession with me. I harbor no ill will towards him, and I hope that he can find a way to live a happy and fulfilling life. The last story is titled, "My Mom Gave Me Up for $2,500. So, backstory, my mom and dad split up when I was roughly 9 or 10 years old due to my mother cheating on my father when he was out of the country. He's a pilot. At the time, it was me and my 2 older sisters, one of which was already an adult, so my older sister and I were left under my mother's custody due to my father always flying and not wanting us to go through moving all the time. As far as the details go, my dad not only paid my mom child support, but also paid off the house. Despite having little money to take care of himself, he paid my mom more than what he actually owed. Yet, my sister and I never saw that money. After the divorce, my mom turned to many things: sleeping around, gambling, drinking, and eventually meth. Though that didn't last long due to my dad finding out and threatening to take us away. My sister practically became my mother since ours decided to step down from the plate, and I was too young to take care of myself. When my sister left for college, all the emotional abuse she took ended up falling on me, which sent me into a loop. Due to my sister taking all the damage, I typically saw my mother as, well, my mother. My young brain didn't notice how often she didn't come home at night, or the lack of food in the house, or the constant weeks I'd wear one outfit since I didn't have other clothes that fit. I didn't notice how not normal this is. Heading into high school, it became more and more obvious this wasn't right at all, yet I still loved my mother. We bantered and ate fast food together, and she was proud of my accomplishments. But she had her moments, dropping huge hints that I'm too boyish like my dad, refusing to let me cut my hair, pressuring me into wearing makeup, heels, dresses, convincing me I don't need therapy as my therapist at the time made me uncomfortable, one of those Christian therapists that made everything about God. While I am a Christian, it didn't help the conversation, and so on. Meanwhile, my dad met a woman, and they fell in love. When she became pregnant with his kid, he moved her to America after my little sister was born and started a new family. I love my stepmom. She's literally the sweetest woman I know, and I adore my baby sister, and eventually my second baby sister. Over time, after spending many nights in their home, I came to realize how much happier I was at their house over my mother's. One day, I told my dad I want to officially live with him. At this point in time, I've noticed how depressed I am and how things aren't normal in my mom's house. When I told my mother this, she was deeply upset and cried, but she understood, or so I thought. That's when everything went downhill. The text messages started, sly guilt trips and remarks on how someone else convinced me to move out, that my father convinced me she was the bad guy. The more these texts happened, the warier I became on talking to her. It got to the point where I would cry after every conversation because I was so confused and lost. One day she practically trapped me in her car in my best friend's driveway to tell me how my reasons for leaving her were bullcrap and that I clearly don't remember what it was like in that house. Cue my memory issues. But enough about that, let's get to the good part, the custody case. Due to me being the last child between my mother and father, my dad no longer had to pay child support. Obviously, they go to court about this. Except, my mom didn't show up for many, many hearings. When she did, she had this bullcrap story about how my dad owed her a crapload of money because he never paid the full child support, and how she felt pressured to believe him and trust him when he said he knew how much he owed her. He did. He calculated it himself and actually paid more than what was needed. So, if you're catching on, this fight was about money. Here's a fun little thing. My mom texted me maybe a month before this case started about how she desperately wants me to come home, how she'll do anything to get her baby back. That aged well, didn't it? Because one day my mom stated that if my dad pays her $2,500, she'll give up full custody of me. My dad agreed to it and it was over. She gave up her custody rights for $2,500. It still stings. I'm still bitter and angry to this day about it, and this case happened years ago. I don't think my mom is aware I know the details on this case, as she very rarely reaches out to me as if we still have a relationship to tell me how much she loves and misses me. The thing is, I learned that my mom actually despised me after the divorce because I reminded her of my dad. We have the same eyes and resting face, lol. My mom just loves being the victim and even tried to convince my sister she doesn't remember doing all the stuff she did to us. She even blamed my dad for her cheating on him and said so to my face. I haven't had a real conversation with her since Christmas, over the phone of course, and haven't seen her in person since maybe before the pandemic. She texted me recently all excited about a gift she got for my sister's unborn baby, and it sent a whole new wave of resentment towards her. I stopped trying long ago to have a relationship with her as she doesn't try in return, and will continue to do so until she admits her wrongs, apologizes, and actually tries to be a ducking mother for once in her life. Until then, my only mother is my lovely stepmom.
The next one is an entitled People Story.
Since the family intervention, my parents have kept my brother in check. And they're doing okay in terms of making up for years of treating me like crap. They've even promised to host my next birthday and have my favorite cake with my name on it. My brother did overhear this because my parents had him doing dishes in the kitchen, and he just stopped what he was doing and went right to his room. No fake crying, just a complete shutdown. He still glares at me from his window every time I leave when I come to visit. A little while ago, my parents have allowed my brother some privileges for good behavior. Though, to my brother, they're basically the opposite of anything he'd like. My parents decided that he could have a little fun for good behavior. So, my dad dug out his old N64 and Game Boy Color from the 90s. He still had most of his old games for both systems, and also had an old CRT TV to hook them up to. When they were offered to my brother, he just complained that they were old and boring. My dad just said he could suit himself then and go back to reading. Took one night before my brother was begging to have the old 90s game systems. He used to have many game systems, a gaming PC, and even a gaming chair with Bluetooth speakers on it. Now all he has is a folding chair or his bed to sit on when gaming. I came by for a visit around the time he first got the N64 because my parents wanted to have me over for dinner, and I got to see my brother in his room yelling at the old CRT TV while playing Mario 64. He really wasn't happy, especially since he couldn't even go online to check for guides, walkthroughs, or cheat codes. For the Game Boy Color, I saw he had some Pokemon games and at least one Donkey Kong. My dad has said that if my brother is extra good by the end of the summer, they'll upgrade him to a Game Boy Advance. My parents quickly realized, though, that the Game Boy Color would eat AA batteries, so my brother has to use a power cord for it now, and he does play it. Maybe because he used to have a phone in his hands playing app games so much, because my brother liked cycling but no longer owns a bike since our parents sold it. He was without an outlet to exercise. My dad found a used exercise bike on Facebook Marketplace and put it in my brother's room. He also got a used CD player mini boombox from somewhere the same day. So yeah, my brother just rides that exercise bike since he can't go outside unless it's to do chores, and he rides it aggressively. He tunes in to whatever music gets him going, and then he rides that exercise bike hard. From the look on his face, I'd call it hate writing. Almost like what you'd expect to see on the face of a vindictive prison inmate exercising in their cell and waiting for the day they can get out and get revenge. I had mentioned this to my parents, and they have the same worries that I do. So my dad started burning CDs with my brother's favorite music that used to be on his gaming computer that they also sold. Each burned CD has 10 songs, and he would get one for every week of good behavior. He's only gotten one so far since this started, not because of bad behavior, but because not enough time has gone by for him to get more. I'm not sure if I'd call my brother's behavior good, he's just not really being bad. I don't hear him complaining out loud anymore most of the time, but I see it in his face. Especially when he glares at me from his window when I get on my mini bike to go home. He definitely resents me. But it's not the same look he gives our parents when they aren't looking. He glares at them like they destroyed his life. But if I were to put it into words, he glares at me with envy, like I have everything he wants. The look just seems to say, just wait till I'm 18. I remember having those same thoughts when I wanted to move the hell out after high school. But I made sure I had life plans with the help of my aunt when I moved out. But my brother doesn't know anything about how to do that. So he's probably still thinking of it in the simplest way a kid usually would. Oh great, now I'm sounding like a know-it-all. I've tried to talk with my brother, but he doesn't have much to say. I've been stopping by every few days to spend some time with him. We don't speak much because he's gotten very quiet, but he does seem to enjoy having someone to play with since our parents won't. He eagerly hands me a controller every time I'm there. We've mostly been playing racing games like Mario Kart on Dad's old N64 in my brother's room, and he gets pretty aggressive while playing. He keeps swinging the controller around wildly with nearly every move he makes, and has even shoved me over a few times when he was losing. I've learned to brace my legs so he can't do that. He had a few light tantrums for losing, but is getting a little better. I've had some game FAQs, walkthroughs, and cheat codes of some of the games he's been playing on the old N64 printed out at the local library and put them in a binder for him. And that's made him be a little nicer to me. Our parents wanted to get some stuff for summer homeschooling for my brother, but I warned them that was probably not a good idea. He's already in an almost constant state of anger, and the goal is to mellow him out and make him more accepting life won't go his way like it used to anymore, not piss him off even more. My dad got angry with me about how he's the father and not me, and that sparked an argument where I reminded him of the things that went on over the past decade. All of the favoritism, all of how I was blamed for so much, even how I had to hide my money at my aunt's house because they kept letting my brother try to steal it. I didn't outright say he's a bad parent, but it was heavily implied. He backed off and my mom told him I was right and trying to force home summer schooling on my brother will not help. That made my dad shut down and he went to drink alone in the living room. My mom has apologized to me repeatedly over her past actions. She says she blames herself because it was her idea to coddle my brother so much and my dad just went along with it. She told me that back then, she was never thinking ahead to what my brother would be like as an adult. She basically refused to admit he was going to grow up, so she just kept spoiling him to try and keep him as her baby. My parents have scheduled couples counseling, but it's going to be a while before they get in due to the wait period. My dad is pretty obviously not looking forward to it. It's harder to make him admit wrongdoing than my mom. He caved and admitted how much he'd screwed up during the family intervention, but since then, he's tried to act like he's just a normal parent. But I've made it clear that pretending that crap didn't happen won't make it go away, and my mom agrees with me. So that's where things are right now. Hopefully, my next update will be better. The next story is titled, Raging Karen Pretends to be Owner's Wife and Calls Cops on Me. Doesn't realize I'm the wife and own this place. Opening a restaurant is no easy feat, and when my husband and I finally opened our dream restaurant, it seemed like all of our hard work had paid off. We poured all our savings into the business, and we were excited to finally see it come to fruition. However, our excitement was short-lived as the pandemic hit, and we were forced to close our doors just a year after opening. We were unsure if we would ever be able to reopen, but we refused to give up. We worked tirelessly to stay afloat and did everything we could to keep our business going. It was a challenging time, and we had to lay off many of our staff members just to keep our heads above the water. After several months of lockdown, restrictions were lifted and we were finally able to reopen our doors. It was a joyous moment, but we were still apprehensive. We knew that we were far from out of the woods, and we had to work harder than ever to ensure that our business stayed afloat. One evening, a woman walked into our restaurant dressed in an expensive suit and wearing an air of arrogance around her. We had never seen her before, but she seemed to think that she owned the place. She refused to pay for her meal and claimed that she was the wife of the owner and as such did not have to pay. When I tried to reason with her, she flew into a rage and started causing a scene. She knocked everything off her table and threatened to call the police on us. We tried to defuse the situation by offering her free dessert, but it only made things worse. She called the police, claiming that we were harassing her and even tried to stab me with a fork. Little did she know that I was the real owner and her lies had no power over me. I managed to get the upper hand and she was arrested for assaulting the police. She was banned from ever entering our restaurant again. The incident with Karen taught me a valuable lesson. I realized that there are people out there who will do anything to take advantage of small businesses like ours. It's a harsh reality that many restaurant owners face every day, and I wanted to make sure that we never faced such a situation again. Months had passed since the incident with Karen, and our restaurant had managed to stay afloat thanks to our loyal customers. However, the pandemic continued to take its toll, and we knew that we had to come up with new ways to keep our business running. We decided to start offering takeout and delivery services, which proved to be a huge hit with our customers. We also revamped our menu, adding new dishes and expanding our offerings to include more vegetarian and vegan options. We even started offering catering services for small events and parties. As our business grew, we knew that we needed to expand our space. We managed to secure a new location just a few blocks away from our current restaurant, and we started working on renovating the space. It was a daunting task, but we were determined to make it work. Finally, after months of hard work, we were ready to unveil our new restaurant. We hosted a grand opening event, and our loyal customers came out in droves to show their support. It was an emotional moment for us, and we were overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. As the night wore on, we noticed a woman in the crowd who seemed to be eyeing us suspiciously. At first, we thought it was just our imagination, but then we realized that we recognized her. It was Karen. My heart sank, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. I had no idea what she was doing there, but I knew that it couldn't be good. We had banned her from our restaurant, and yet there she was, standing in the crowd. As the night wore on, Karen made her way to the front of the line, and my husband went over to talk to her. I could see the tension mounting, and I knew that something was about to happen. Suddenly, Karen lunged at my husband, trying to attack him. It was chaos, and our customers started panicking, trying to get out of harm's way. But we had learned from our previous experience, and we were better prepared this time. We had hired extra security for the event, and they quickly intervened, restraining Karen and calling the police. As it turned out, Karen had been banned from several other restaurants in the area for similar behavior. She was arrested and charged with assault and disorderly conduct, and we never saw her again. The incident with Karen was a stark reminder of the challenges that small business owners face every day. But it was also a testament to our resilience and determination. We refused to let one person ruin our dream, and we fought hard to make sure that our restaurant continued to thrive. Today, our restaurant is more successful than ever, and we continue to innovate and come up with new ways to keep our customers happy. We are grateful for the support of our loyal customers, and we're proud to be a part of this community. We know that there will be more challenges ahead, but we are ready to face them head on. The next story is titled, I Stopped My Neighbor's Loud Parties and They Ended Up Moving. Our neighbors had very, very loud parties frequently that would go until 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., even on weeknights. When I walked by his house to check my mail, he would mutter insults to himself about me and my kids. I tried to talk to him through his adult son because my Spanish isn't that great and his English was no better. I didn't feel good about calling the cops on him because he is a minority and his English is poor. Nothing worked. Other neighbors did call the cops on him and his family, and it didn't work anyway. Finally, I had completely had it and ordered this stuff called Liquid A-. A couple of squirts were supposed to be effective, but I didn't know how well it would really work from the other side of our shared wooden fence. The next party was on a Tuesday night, and it was around midnight. There was super loud music and tons of people dancing and drinking as usual. I went outside and poured the entire 4-ounce bottle on my side of the fence along the fence line, then quickly ran back inside. Within 20 minutes, the music was off and the guests were chattering, trying to figure out what was wrong. The guests left to my delight, and everyone in my house finally got some sleep. The following day, there was a huge sewage repair company truck outside their house most of the day. A month later, a for sale sign appeared for one day, and it was sold to a very quiet lady who said, "I hope my wind chimes aren't too loud for you." I do not miss them at all. The last story is titled, My Aunt Refuses to Take $200 After Going Bankrupt. So, a bit of background, my aunt recently went bankrupt. Apparently she spent it all on jewelry for herself, but that's just what I've heard. The sad part is, it's probably true. She's been desperately asking for help for the past month, so last week, me and my mom decided to pitch in, and each gave her a loan of $100. She wants cash, though, but it wasn't too big of a problem. We go to her house, and the following conversation ensues. CB, choosing beggar aunt. M, mom. Shrek, me. CB. Oh, hi, did you bring the money? M. Hey, haven't seen you in a while. And yes, we did bring the money. CB holds out hand. My mom and I ignored the fact that she was being rude and handed her the money. CB counts the money and looks at us with the most Karen looks ever. CB. I thought we agreed on $2,000. This is only $200. Shrek. No, we agreed on $200. There must have been a misunderstanding. CB. I need more money than that. What are you going to do with all the money you have stashed away in your bank account anyways? Shrek. First of all, I don't have that much money. Second of all, you should be thankful we're giving you any money at all. CB. That is so rude and disrespectful. Why would you talk to your aunt that way? Shrek and M, awkwardly looking at each other. CB. I'm not taking this money. I want at least over $1,000, and anyways, I could report you guys to the police. M. For what? CB. Stealing. You guys agreed to $2,000, and this is only $200. Shrek. How is that stealing? It's our money, we don't have to give it to you. Keep the $200, we're leaving. Me and my mom walked out the door with my aunt, screaming that she would report us to the police. We never ended up getting reported for anything, and I haven't talked to my aunt since.
The next one is an entitled people story.
My neighbor from a couple of doors down and I had a long-running feud. It all started when his dog came into my backyard, and my dog attacked it. I was nearby and able to call my dog off before it got serious, but the other dog had a couple of bite wounds. The neighbor wanted me to pay the vet bill. When he threatened me with a lawsuit, I offered to pay half, even though I owed him nothing. It was his dog that was off the leash and in my yard, after all. He declined the offer, took me to small claims court, and lost. The trial lasted all of 3 minutes when the judge found in my favor. That set in motion him starting to mess with me on a regular basis. My garbage cans would get knocked over every trash day. He would honk his horn and flip me off if he drove by my house. He tried to get my 10-year-old son arrested for riding another neighbor's mini bike. Never called the cops on their kids, just mine. It was all stupid petty crap. But it was a lot of stupid petty crap, and we were growing frustrated and mildly concerned about what he might do. We eventually grew tired of it and filed a restraining order against him. We dropped the legal case against him when we received a letter from his lawyer stating that he would refrain from any sort of contact with any of my family for a period of 2 years. Things settled down at that point, but I was not yet satisfied. I had been staying on the high road through all of this, not responding to any of his shenanigans in any way. I had a desire to get revenge but never acted on it. Then one day, I hatched my plan of evil genius. I was in the hardware store and I noticed some Japanese beetle traps. These traps are just a plastic bag with a scent pack. The beetles are drawn to the scent, fall in the bag, and can't get out. They also sold refill packages of the scent packs only, 4 per package. My neighbor has a very large rose garden in his front lawn. It is his pride and joy. Japanese beetles love roses. So I bought 4 packages of the refill packs. The scent pack is a waxy substance in a shallow plastic cup. I put the packs in the freezer overnight to allow me to pull the wax out easily. The next morning I woke up at 3 a.m. I popped the wax squares out of their cups and put them in a baggie. Then I crept over to my neighbor's house and spread the wax squares in the mulch under his rose garden, covering them from view with a bit of the hardwood mulch. That day was a hot one. By 11 a.m. it was north of 90 degrees F. I figured the wax had probably melted into the dark mulch. Also, by 11 a.m., the Japanese beetles were starting to arrive at my neighbor's roses. I went on a bike ride later in the evening and could see a small swarm of them attacking the roses. My neighbor had not yet noticed what was happening. By noon the next day, there was a freaking cloud of them. There had to be hundreds, if not thousands. My neighbor noticed. That afternoon, I could see him spraying them and spreading 7 powder and waving his arms in the air in frustration. By the 3rd day, there were thousands of beetles, if not tens of thousands. They were everywhere in his front lawn and wreaking havoc on his roses. By the end of the fourth day, there was nothing left of his rose garden, other than a few tattered leaves and the thorny stalk, and that was it. The deed was done, and I was satisfied and laughing quietly to myself, but laughing and laughing. And I never told a soul what I did, not even my wife. This was a few years ago, and his rose garden is fully recovered now, and it will stay beautiful so long as he keeps being a quiet neighbor. Looking back, I realized that what I did was not right. Revenge is not the answer, and it only leads to more problems. I should have found a way to settle the dispute amicably instead of resorting to revenge. However, I also learned that sometimes the best revenge is living well and being happy. My neighbor may have won the battle, but I won the war. My family and I are still living in the same house, enjoying our peaceful life, while my neighbor is still struggling with his roses. I hope that one day he will learn to let go of the past and move on. But until then, I will continue to live my life and enjoy every moment of it. The next one is an entitled people story. It was just another day at the military base, but something was off. I could sense it, even though I couldn't pinpoint what it was. And then, the call came. It was my wife, and she was crying. I was immediately on edge, wondering what could have gone so wrong. She told me that our house had been foreclosed on and sold for a measly $1,350, all because she missed 2 HOA payments. I was in complete disbelief. How could this happen? We had 4 children under the age of 7, and we had poured all our savings into buying that beautiful family home just 4 years ago. I had to act quickly. I put in an emergency request to return home, and before I knew it, I was on a plane back home to sort this mess out. When I got home, my wife was packing up our belongings into boxes, her face streaked with tears. I hugged her tightly and promised her that we would find a way to fix this. I was furious when I read the paperwork that detailed the sale of our home. All of this over just $1,100 in missed payments. How could the HOA do this to us? I immediately began searching for a lawyer to help us, but it wasn't easy. The HOA held all the power in our state, and most lawyers didn't want to touch these cases. But we finally found someone who was willing to help us. The lawyer pointed out that the Service Members Civil Relief Act could protect us, as I was deployed overseas at the time of the sale. We took the HOA to court, and the judge ultimately ruled in our favor. We were ecstatic to get our home back, but the HOA continued to be a thorn in our side. They nitpicked every little thing, making our lives more difficult than they needed to be. And then, one day, we received a shocking update. The HOA had been embezzling funds from its residents, and it had finally been exposed. The HOA was in shambles, and we couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. After everything they put us through, it was gratifying to see them get what was coming to them. And as for us, we continued to live happily in our home, grateful for the protections afforded to us by the Service Members Civil Relief Act. But the story didn't end there. One day we received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from the company that had bought our home for $1,350. They were now being sued for fraud, and they needed our help. It turns out that they had misrepresented the sale to the court, claiming that they had bought the home for $150,000 instead of $1,350. They were now facing a hefty lawsuit, and they needed our testimony to prove that they had indeed bought the home for the lower amount. We were hesitant at first, but our lawyer advised us that it was the right thing to do. We agreed to testify, and when the trial came around, we were there to provide our evidence. The trial was intense, with lawyers shouting and arguing back and forth. But in the end, justice prevailed. The company was found guilty of fraud, and they were ordered to pay us and the HOA restitution for their deceitful actions. It was a satisfying end to the whole ordeal. We had our home back, and we had helped bring justice to those who had tried to take advantage of us. It was a huge relief for us, and we could finally put this nightmare behind us. We were grateful for the support of our lawyer, family, and friends throughout this entire process. As we settled back into our home, we made sure to keep up with our HOA dues to avoid any future issues. We also made a point to spread awareness about the Service Members Civil Relief Act and the protections it provides for military families. Looking back on this experience, it's clear that the HOA's actions were unjust and unacceptable. But through our perseverance and the support of others, we were able to fight back and come out on top. We were proud to have stood up for our rights and to have helped bring justice to those who tried to take advantage of us. As for our family, we were finally able to move on and enjoy our beautiful home once again, grateful for the small things in life that truly matter. The next one is a petty revenge story. So back in June, I left a very toxic workplace of 8 years. I mainly left due to having a breakdown from being overworked. But this one particular person made working there even worse on top of the excessive work. This guy was 1 year younger than me. He was a 30-year-old man, the type of guy that appears to have peaked in secondary school. Very jock-like mentality and childish too. He was part of my team of 4. I was civil with him just because I had to work with him, but he was my workplace bully. Apart from just the general workplace banter, this guy, let's call him Chris, was relentless with his teasing. What would usually be classified as playful always pushed to bullying from him because he never knew when to quit. And if he noticed you were getting stressed or annoyed, he'd use you as a target of his teasing for the rest of the day. He would be super nice to you when it's just the two of you, but as soon as he has an audience, he picks his victim and will tease them constantly in what he would call playful. And if you ever got annoyed and stood up for yourself, he'd say he's only messing and make out like he's the victim. He's that type of person. One specific thing that he absolutely lost any respect I had for him was when I was still working there, some ex-employee wrote a very aggressive and angry review on Glassdoor about the company. Just because this person used a phrase that I use, Chris thought the review was me. As much as I proved that it wasn't me, didn't even have a Glassdoor account at the time. He was relentless with campaigning around the office that I was the one that wrote it. I also believe he told the boss that I was the one that wrote it once I left, and that's why I didn't get any freelance work from them afterward. So after I left my workplace, my old team still has a group WhatsApp that I'm a part of, and we still talk almost every other day on it. After I left, the group chat went a bit quiet. I assumed they made a new one of just them, which is fair, but the chat still kept going occasionally. I unfollowed and unfriended Chris on Facebook and Instagram because I just didn't want to be associated with him anymore. In the middle of the group chat, he broadcasts, "Why did you unfollow and unfriend me on Facebook?" whilst also at mentioning me. He wrote this message at 6:30 a.m. I woke up to this message broadcasted in the group chat. It pissed me off, so I was honest and said that he's a bully, and instead of making a big thing of it, I'd rather just remove him from the equation. I also said that it was immature of him to do this over the group chat and not in private. He didn't say anything, he just left the group chat and blocked me on everything. The group chat pretty much died after that. I was at the time livid. This 30-year-old man set fire to the group chat, saw what I said, and then ran off. I thought it must be a blessing in disguise because I finally got to say what I wanted to him, and I now don't have to acknowledge him again. But I was wrong. Skip to 3 months later, my husband and I were walking through town and stopping off at a pub to get some grub. And lo and behold, I see Chris there with a new girl I hadn't seen before. I was feeling extra confident and decided to approach him. I went up to him and said, "Hey Chris, long time no see," with a big grin on my face. Chris looked like a deer in headlights with perfect red cheeks. I asked him, "How are things? You doing well?" He replied in a very normal way, clearly not wanting the conversation to continue and looking awkward as duck in front of his new girl. She asked how we knew each other. I generously waited for Chris to say, "We used to work together." So I added, "Yeah, it's quite funny, really. Chris used to be my workplace bully. He's the reason why I struggled financially after I left my old job because he accused me of writing a hostile review of the company, which I proved I didn't do, and lost me a lot of freelance work because of it." He was gobsmacked, with a face redder than a traffic light. The new girl clearly looked confused and uncomfortable. Neither of them responded. I didn't want it to carry on much longer as it wasn't really fair on her, but just to add salt to the wound, I said, "So, is this your new girlfriend, Catherine? Or is this Georgia? What happened with Sarah since someone said you were still with her last week?" All of those are completely true. He gets around. This girl went from confused to angry in the blink of an eye and just stared at Chris. I just said, "Oh, whoops, I really put my foot in my mouth, haven't I? I better go. It was nice seeing you again, Chris." And walked off. My husband, while he felt bad for the girl, which I did too, but to be fair, I might have saved her from inevitably being dumped by him a few weeks later when he gets bored of her, was very proud that I finally got my closure revenge on him. It feels amazing. Like, I feel petty as duck, but it felt good for there to finally be some consequences for this Chris guy being a dick. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened on Friday night, and I've been struggling to put into words just how insane it was. My ex-in-laws and my ex showed up at my job during the biggest event of the year. Every year at my job there is a Christmas-themed party. The dancers dress up as sexy elves, my boss dresses up as Santa, the bartenders dress up as reindeer, and the bouncers dress up as snowmen. The place is beautifully decorated as a winter wonderland with a huge throne for my boss to sit on and custom poles for the dancers to dance around him. It's a huge thing at my job and is always one of the highest grossing nights of the year. It's advertised all over town that people can come, get their pictures taken with us, sit on Santa's lap, and enjoy a fun evening with custom Christmas music made by a DJ. We even have Christmas-themed drinks, guys. And they are so good. I was so excited for it because I started working there this year, so it was my first time being part of this event. I was dancing that evening, so I was dressed up as a sexy elf. I was feeling great. It was pretty late into the evening, around midnight, when this incident took place. I was dancing on stage when out of nowhere I heard the shrieking sound of my ex-Mill crying. I turned around and there they were. Ex-Mill, ex-Phil, and Bill. Ex-Mill was slapping at Bill's arm and pointing at me. I couldn't make out what she was saying over the music. All I could hear was the shrill sound of her voice. I started looking around for Kyle, my boyfriend. I couldn't see him, but I did see other bouncers, so I waved at them, trying to get their attention. We have a special wave that when a bouncer sees it, they know to come running. Bill comes to the stage and starts shouting at me while the men around him were waving cash at me. He tells me to come down and to come with him, that I was bringing shame to his family. I ignored him. I saw a couple of bouncers heading for us, so I kept dancing, believing I was saved. That was the protocol. Call the bouncer and keep working to avoid making a scene. It was then I felt someone grab my ankle and pull. In my panic, I fell and let out a scream. I looked up and it was Bill. He had pulled himself onto the stage and grabbed me. I started kicking at him with my other foot until the bouncers finally got there and pulled him away from me. I felt someone else grab me and I screamed again, but when I looked up I saw it was Kyle. Bill and my ex-in-laws were taken into the office while I was taken backstage to ride out the panic attack. Kyle held me until I calmed down. The police were called, and I got to watch as Bill was forced into the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. He's being charged with public disturbance, assault, and trespassing. My boss was talking to my ex-in-laws, telling them not to come back and warned them the police would be called if they did. Despite how pissed he was, my boss was pretty calm and polite. I then heard ex-Mill shouting about how she was going to take me to court to take my children away from me because a godless whore like me wasn't fit to be a mother. I couldn't take hearing that, and I rushed at her. Kyle had to grab me and stop me, but I was screaming at her that she was a psychopath and would never get her hands on my kids again, that she had raised a lying, cheating, emotionally abusive scumbag. She raised a hand to slap me, but the bouncers and police got between us. She and ex-Phil got into their car and drove off after being threatened with arrest. After calm had been restored, we all went back inside and resumed the party. I made good money that night. Even Samantha, my job's entitled gossip, couldn't deny what Bill and my ex-in-laws did was crazy. Over the weekend, I got a call from someone claiming to be Bill's ex-girlfriend, the one he cheated on me with. I asked her how she got my number, and she said she had her ways. She said she decided to call me after Bill called her begging to get bailed out. She told me that during their relationship, ex-Mill treated her like crap and compared me and her a lot and always acted like she wasn't good enough. She was relieved when they went to Greece, believing her and Bill's relationship could be salvaged at that point. But she was wrong. Bill would also talk about me a lot, and she was always crying about being compared to his ex. When I got the job at the club, his behavior became more erratic. She told me that she confronted him after he was thrown out of the club because word travels fast, and she heard about the whole thing. He got pissed and slapped her, then threw her out of his house. She got him arrested, and he was fired from his job as a result. I thanked her for the information and promptly told her never to call me again. She asked me why, and I told her that she had no issue cheating with Bill and hurting his wife and kids, and that she was only calling me to get back at him for what he's done to her. I hung up and blocked her. I plan to go file for a restraining order today, but now I am armed with more information that will make the process so much easier and go so much faster. Win for me. Merry Christmas, everyone. The next one is an entitled parent story. My mom and I immigrated to the U.S. in 1997. She met my stepdad through an international dating service. My life in America was never hard, so to speak. My mom always told my sister and me that times were tough while growing up. But as a kid, I never knew what it meant. My childhood was filled with the word no. As a kid, you're going to want toys and to go do things with friends. My mom always said no, and if I asked my stepdad, all he would say was, "Go ask your mama," which always led to a no. Now I'll say this, I was never starved. I was given what I needed growing up, but it was always bottom of the barrel. I remember asking my mom for a pair of Nikes once, and I mean once. They were $65.99 and my mom looked at me and said, "You're so greedy. You are so ungrateful for what you have. Your family back home could never afford nice shoes like that. Don't ever ask me for shoes like that again." Until I got my first job, I wore Walmart and Kmart clothes. My mom drilled into my head that me asking for things that any kid would ask for was wrong. The family back home had it so bad that I would be doing them an injustice for having clothes or toys or video games when they couldn't. A side note that is important. When I came to America initially, my mom and stepdad did not want me to start school a year late, so I brain dumped Spanish and learned English. It was not until last year, 2022, that I really started taking the initiative to learn Spanish. Another side note about my parents. They have separate bank accounts. My stepdad claims that his money is his and my mom's money is hers. This will become relevant. Also, my mom would never pay for a ticket for me to visit our home country because she said it was too expensive, and I didn't speak Spanish anyway. I got to the point where I was very fluent in conversational Spanish. My original plan was to surprise my mom. I practiced by getting in touch with family members back in our home country. I was talking to one of my cousins and I asked her how her day was. She said it was okay, but she was waiting for the wire from my mom. At first I thought that was some sort of slang that I was not familiar with, so I asked her to clarify what she meant. She then told me that she was waiting for my mom to send $800 down to them, and they were waiting at a Western Union for her MoneyGram to come in. At first I was thinking something was wrong, so I offered to help. My cousin said no, and when I asked again if something was wrong, my cousin said no. Then I asked how long my mom had been sending money. She said since 1999. I asked her if it was always $800 and my cousin explained that every month was a little different, but it's always been around $600 a month. I said all right and called my mom. I told her that our cousin told me about the money she'd been sending down there every month since 1999. She said, "Yeah, it's for your grandmother's medicines." I called her out. "No, it's not. You send them money because you feel guilty about living in America and they can't. So you send them money every month, and they spend it on the same things you have told me I wasn't allowed to have because I was GREED." I told her that during that conversation, I asked my cousin what type of clothes and shoes they wear. They said all the name brands that I was never allowed to look at. They took vacations on my mom's dime to Brazil, Peru, and Puerto Rico, while I missed every single school field trip that required money. I got a job at 14 so I could help with groceries and buy my own clothes because I felt that I was costing my mom too much money. I explained that according to them, she would send at least $600 a month down there. That would mean she has sent over $170K. I told her she could have helped me and my sister get through college, but instead, we had to take the student loan route. I asked her this question. Is the reason you never bought me and my sister tickets to go visit because you didn't want us to see the truth? Her reply, I brought you to America. You had it better than all of them. You're just ungrateful. I said, no, I just don't feel guilty about being here. If they really wanted to come here, they should have used the $170K you sent them. If you have made it this far, you might be wondering where my stepdad is in all this. His belief is, if the conversation is about money that is not his, then it's not his problem. It was never about the clothes or the shoes. I just felt so betrayed because I wanted to experience what other kids around me experienced, not everything, but some things. As a kid, I was made to feel terrible for wanting anything because I supposedly had it better. I handed my mom my paychecks for years thinking times were just too tough, just to find out that I had nothing to feel guilty about. I feel like my childhood was taken away from me because I wanted all the things a normal kid asked for. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.